Hey there, Vermont. Just got done voting at Berrytown Elementary School for the forced merger of Berrytown, Berry City. Shared the results. You got to get in there to vote 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. today. Cast your vote on whether you support the forced merger between Berrytown, Berry City. Let's face it, a lot of individuals across the state of Vermont, and let's just say a lot of the school districts across the state of Vermont, it's very interesting how the forced mergers are being done in towns that have a surplus versus some of the city areas that have a deficit. Kind of works just like the whole IBM Global Foundries paper exchange, but now they're applying it in the education industry. And let's face it, you should be engaged. You better pay attention because it's an interesting paper shuffle. Hi there, Kelly Michelle Dills. Hopefully I enunciated your name correctly. How are you? So, cast our vote. We'll have to see how the result is, again this afternoon. The Department of Education has, basically forced this on several school districts throughout the state of Vermont. They've got a shrinking student body. They certainly do not need all the administrative tiers of educators in several of the districts. Vermont is a dying state right now due to the fact that, well, they've jumped on some of the big boondoggles of Leahy, Sanders, and Welchism, Sanderism, Leahyism. Vermont has suffered some serious declines in several industries, and this whole Green New Deal, because Bernie Sanders has finally announced his 2020 run, and it's interesting how the so-called Democrat/progressive socialists are adopting certain portions, the Medicare for all, another paid-in model. Now they want to nationalize it. Anything that they want to nationalize, especially if it's a successful program, that's called socialism, folks. Not too hard to figure that out. And you should definitely get involved with this 2019-2020 Vermont legislative agenda because there are some serious bills that you need to really dive in. They're mixing certain keywords, let's say, of different professions in order to seriously restrict and regulate your rights as a Vermont taxpayer, as a Vermont voter. I'm just going to, say this as, someone who is trying to successfully start up high-tech business models here in the state of Vermont. There are several bills that you need to dive into because it's pretty scary. Either scary or extremely lazy on several of the legislators down in the Vermont House, the Vermont Senate, the Lieutenant Governor. They feel they have a supermajority. They can ram everything down your throats. They say they make this stuff public. It's there. Granted, you have to go to that website. You have to dive into each one of these bills, and you certainly have to read the very creative keywords on how they're going to dictate your lives, and basically strip you of certain rights. So that being said, there's an important mixer down at the State House this evening. The sportsman's bills, I mean, these are some serious bills. When you start diving into S1, S2, S3, S13, S22, S26, S29, H30, H56, H80, H159, and H190, it's pretty scary. Because the S1, the magazine ban amendment, remove sunset for out-of-state competitors. You definitely need to dive into that bill. The S2, the transfer of magazines by will to heirs. S3, the redefined magazine capacity to 30 for rifles. S13, the transfer of standard magazines to immediate family. S22, the 48-hour waiting period to purchase and mandatory lock up your guns for storage. S26 prohibits manufacture of firearm by 3D printing and sharing 3D print files. The S29 prohibits sale of animal parts, ivory especially, firearms not exempt. Interesting bill on that one. The H30 bill, confiscation of firearms for restraining orders. The H56, use of suppressors for hunting. H80, hearing protection while hunting, ability to use suppressors. H80, oh, whoops, I apologize. I just read that one. That's the H80. The H159 bill, a 72-hour waiting period to purchase any firearm. So there's a 48-hour waiting period to purchase and mandatory lockup of your gun storage. And there's a 72-hour waiting period to purchase any firearm, period. And the H190 bill, reconfiguration of how wildlife is managed in Vermont. And the Salisbury fish hatchery has been defunded. So that's apparently an asset that is no longer an asset in the fish and wildlife, or they're just unable to afford. I mean, let's face it, they've got so many restrictions in the fish and wildlife area now, a lot of people are just giving up fishing, giving up hunting. I know I no longer feel like being harassed all the time. You know, I try to definitely keep up with all the rules and the restrictions and the super fine print. And, I mean, let's face it, we have enough of a police state as it is. You better get into these bills, folks, because there's some very serious restrictions, interesting ways on how they're going to strip you of your rights. And the mixing of certain professions by a Connecticut representative, gun restrictions as a preventative suicide measure. So we better start securing the, vehicles, because let's face it, vehicles have been used to commit suicide as well. Any other means of suicide, they certainly, they're really being very creative by mixing up certain keywords with certain professions. And just like the H57 S25 bill, they had this public hearing after 46 plus years, Roe versus Wade, and yet here is an opportunity for Vermont to lead and actually write in the safeties, the procedures, making sure that this so-called Planned Parenthood healthcare system has to adhere to the other restrictions in any other medical community. I mean, let's face it. You've got women. It's their way or the highway. Many people do end up choosing the highway. It's but to pass a bill, an H57 and an S25 bill, with no safety procedures, period. We know the exemptions. Whether it's a licensed doctor, a licensed nurse practitioner, a licensed anesthesiologist that's administering a very dangerous procedure. I mean, if there's a nick in a woman's wound and she ends up bleeding out, there's no recourse. Why, if you are a so-called healthcare system, you get to play by no rules whatsoever? no restrictions, no safeties, no verification of, medical licenses in order to practice that specific field. The disposal, the biohazards, no health inspections. I mean, come on. That's just, and for the women that like to just yell at you, they don't like to, it's their way or the highway. It's their body. Well, let's face it. They obviously have never been a parent. And you would want any person going into any medical procedure to be fully informed. Make sure that there are safeties so that there's a very high success rate for that medical procedure. And for a certain individual to call themselves a doctor, or other individuals, they're abortionist experts, and yet they have no restrictions, there's no safeties, there's no, health inspections, there's no dispose of the bodily remains, and they're basically just profiteering off of the selling of, slowly dissecting a baby, a human fetus in a young woman's womb. And it seems whenever you ask, if you're a male, if you ask these questions, and you actually want, you want this legislation to be safe, written in with these safe procedures, we know the exemptions. I mean, no one deserves a sexual assault of any kind, period, whether you're male or female. And I'm really sick and tired of how certain statistics are being completely negated, especially when it comes to, if you're a same-sex couple. Listen, there is same-sex rape. It is out there in the community. The statistics throughout several states. Vermont does a horrible job when it comes to statistics, period. They are trying to get up to speed. It's just like this Green New Deal that they're trying to push with the 12-year, the world is going to end apocalypse approach, another fear-mongering tactic that they're very good at doing. Let's face it. I'm not opposed to green energy. We should have a diversified energy portfolio. What I'm sick and tired of, though, are individuals that haven't done their homework. They haven't even crunched the numbers in a very effective model. They plan to extract $500 million a year out of a tax base that cannot sustain it. It's completely unsustainable. For a $15.5 billion plan to install 200 miles of industrial wind turbines, where each industrial wind turbine takes up 1 clear acre. You've got to clear off all those trees, put in that foundation, 1 clear acre. A lot of destruction of the environment, no doubt about it. Then you've got 30,000 acres of solar farms. We've seen plenty of examples of some of these solar farms across the state of Vermont already. Now, how many buildings, how many buildings in Burlington City, Rutland, Bennington, Brattleboro, Barry, White River Junction, St. Johnsbury, Newport, already constructed? How many acres does that accumulate to, roughly? Why do we have to have 30,000 acres of farming area as solar farms? I think it's a good question. Had a great question in another video broadcast on the other side discussing the H57 and the S25 bill, and I've got to give credit for Laurel Ann, I believe, is it Maurer? Hopefully I enunciated her name correctly. Asked some great questions as to why is Vermont, if they want to always be first, they want to lead, if they are master legislators in writing awesome bills, why are they unwilling to put in the safeties the securities and the procedures in order to ensure that that so-called healthcare system and that so-called medical community has to play by the same rules as any other doctor doing any other procedure. I mean, just unrestricted. It's their body, it's their choice. So they want to shut down individuals that have actually conducted research on, let's say, the human genome, breaking down DNA, which several years ago, those technologies are impacting several industries: the medical community, the agribusiness, medicines for serious diseases. But they just want to shut you down. They just want to wear their pink hat with their vaginal genitalia on their heads, screaming and yelling at you, telling you, you know, they don't want you in your uterus, which, listen, I'm pretty selective. I don't want to be jumping into everybody's uterus either. But I also don't want my daughter going through a process that is unsafe. I do not want her to ever deal with someone who's a doctor that is not necessarily a licensed doctor, or a nurse practitioner that is not a licensed nurse practitioner, or an anesthesiologist who is not a licensed anesthesiologist. Lost a cousin from an intern pulling out a tube, left a small nick, ended up bleeding out to death. Age 18. That was a male, by the way. And yet you have women that want to just shut you down because you are not, well, you know, listen, I'm not a woman. I'm very glad that I'm a male. I realize women have a very unique, awesome physiology. Their bodies are, you know, I mean, let's face it. Many of us heterosexual men are genetically bound to women. I think they're pretty cute. Now, granted, there's a small pool of really mean ones. They just don't like men, period. And deflect, blame men for everything. Takes two to tango. Takes two to make love. Takes two to really get in there and, you know, create that baby, for one. And then two, with all the advances, with all the options that we have today, the day after pill, the vast amount of contraceptive products, to sit there and just blatantly yell, spit, scream that you don't want us in your uterus. Well, listen, you're the one that's uneducated, for one. And two, why would you want to go into any clinic with an unlicensed doctor, an unlicensed anesthesiologist, and an unlicensed, you know, nurse practitioner to risk your life? If there's one Gosnell in Pennsylvania, there's several Gosnells throughout all 50 states of the United States of America. No health inspections, no process of disposing their needles effectively, or, you know, environmentally safe. Is it all about profit? I mean, just, I did not realize, I mean, when you look at the estimations, or the valuation, I guess, of dissecting a human fetus, a small baby, either inside a woman's womb in the second, third trimester, or even going all the way, you know, first trimester. Now allowing the birth, setting that baby off to the side, and then a discussion between the mother and the doctor of whether to allow that child to live, or the decision, the pressure on the doctor to end that child's life afterwards. I mean, it's just, come on. With all of the options, this is 2019. Women want their choice, their way or the highway. Well, many people are choosing the highway. When you're completely being discriminated against because you're a male, but you actually care about that woman, you don't want to lose that woman out of your life. If it's a child that she's not ready or doesn't want to have, there should be a discussion about it. That portion, if it's a so-called healthcare system and a so-called medical practice, should have to go by many of the same rules that any other doctor or any other medical procedure in any medical community, period. It's all about, listen, I'm not trying to be difficult here. I want some safe stuff happening. I would never want my daughter to go through this alone or to have the fear that she can't approach her father or one of the parents to discuss this. I mean, granted, it just seems completely cowardly, barbaric, and just lazy for the state of Vermont. They want this attention. They love being first. Then get off your lazy butts and write the legislation. Put in the safeties. We know the exemptions. Make sure that this procedure, health inspections, disposal of waste, environmentally safe, health conscious safe. So there's no spreading of unnecessary diseases. I mean, it's not that hard. And as much as women love to just yell, scream, and yell at you about it because you're a male, I think they're the ones that are on it. They're uneducated. They're just being completely arrogant. And listen, if you don't want anybody's input, it's your choice, it's your body, your way or the highway. Well, I can tell you right now, there's a lot of people choosing the highway. I mean, it's just like I get sick and tired of babysitting alcoholics and dealing with individuals that are addicted to seriously bad, life-threatening drugs. Listen, if you want your pot, fine. But to consistently deny that there's no long-term effects on the human brain or on your body, you're the one listen, I realize you want your drug. That's fine and dandy. But start playing by the rules, too, that everybody else has to. I mean, don't be smoking pot and driving. And listen, after what I've seen across this country and even across overseas, this H57 and S25 bill in Vermont, approved in one committee, 7-3, goes to the Judicial Committee, gets approved 9-2, and yet you're unwilling to write in safety procedures, making sure if this is a healthcare system, if this is a medical community providing. You've got two of the top tier medical communities at the University of Vermont and Dartmouth. Doctors have to go by these procedures. A real licensed doctor. And yet you want unrestricted, uninspected abortion clinics? I mean, come on. Who's uneducated? Either that or it's all about greed, money, and they certainly do not care. And which we all know that's pretty much the summation of it. Listen, men and women do what men and women do. And we've got plenty of cowards out there on both sides of the fence. Okay, if they want to send men and women overseas to protect this country, they really don't, they think that like they're academic elites. When you come back here and you hear something that stupid, that completely unthought out, barbaric, and cowardly, it kind of, it gets you a little fired up. And it's just, then it kind of makes you realize, usually the individuals that are projecting the hate and the discontent or the whatever, they're the ones that are usually the uneducated, have the the fear or whatever. And if you show any kind of concern and you want to make sure that this procedure is safe, with those safeties, every single registered voter in the state of Vermont should be ringing those legislators' phones off the hook, asking for those secure safety procedures, making sure that if it is a medical healthcare system, it has to play by the same rules as any other doctor, whether it's private or a public practice. Because let's face it, we can get around certain protocols, certain procedures, depending if we're a public medical facility or if it's a private, whether it's cosmetic, surgery, making the bling bling, whether it's an abortion expert making the bling bling because they're thinking about how they could dissect the baby effectively in order to make the most amount of money off of that. I never realized there was up to $42,000 that could be generated by one human baby. And that's off of data of 2015 and 2016. This is 3 years later. We're in 2019. We all know how the cost increased, and especially if we pass this new Green Deal, the 12-year fear-mongering tactic that the world, the climate change apocalypse is going to happen. Listen to several awesome presentations by scientists within their field proving that back in the 1800s there was a decrease of like 7 inches of water. Now we're seeing a slight increase. And this climate change thing is becoming a never-ending political boondoggle attempt to attract donations. And Vermont right now is the smallest, number 50, when it comes to carbon footprint. And yet we have a $500 million taxpayer-funded scheme on any fossil fuel, period. Because if you really dive into this decarbonization of Vermont plan, it is a multi-tiered plan. They're getting a bite out of every single thing, and then the end consumer is really getting the big bite, paying the $1.02 for diesel, heating oil, 89 cents for gasoline, and 58 cents for natural gas and propane. We have a show coming up with the Vote for Vermont on Thursday. We have some outstanding individuals that have actually dived into this Green New Deal. Nonpartisan group. Basically, really getting into the infrastructure that the state of Vermont is talking about for this new 12-year climate change apocalypse. The new Green Deal is not very green. It destroys a lot of green, and it doesn't really provide the kind of energy that they're claiming. Hey there, Joe McDonald. So that being said, it's going to impact, Vermont has about 96% small business owners. Really not going to affect the multi-billion-dollar companies. And let's face it, you're seeing kind of like a paper shuffle, what happened with IBM and Global Foundries, all done on paper, no real exchange of money. You're seeing that being passed off into the education industry, where a certain town that has a balanced budget, that has a surplus, is being strategically matched up with a other local district that is deep in debt. Nice way to zero out that debt, isn't it? You merge those two districts together, the one with the surplus ends up paying off the one with the deficit, or at least reducing it quite a bit. And without any options, it's just, no. I don't agree with it. Very interesting approach. Definitely not good business, and it certainly is. Listen, I had some great teachers at Berrytown. They prepared you to go to that next academic level. We had some good teachers at Spalding, although Spalding right now is in a very interesting, let's just say, situation. And I just don't think it's, I don't know. I don't think it's not effective. It certainly does not reward the hardworking individuals that have actually balanced budgets. I don't want a mediocre academic process. There should be, some rewards for applying yourself academically or being a well-rounded student that can succeed at the next level. I know not everybody likes the military. Certainly know that as a veteran. Definitely know that as a veteran that has come back to the state of Vermont, because they will do everything to avoid helping out the men and women that come back from these wars or these periods of serving overseas. They will find every way possible to get around it. Vermont is a horrible business state, period. It's dying. They have an older generation that has enjoyed the best years. They're all retiring. And listen, they have earned it, but stop rigging the system or the up and coming. That's way too much weight. Financially, it's unsustainable. These jobs are not being created here. And it's another big old Leahyism, Sanderism, Welchism, just like that EB5 scandal. Big pie in the sky, big promises and never delivering, but despair, pain, and poverty. So great, Bernie Sanders is finally announced. I can't wait to see his so-called plan. And it's pretty interesting how that side of the ticket, they're no longer calling themselves, or they say, I never claimed I was a Democrat socialist. Yet Kamala Harris wants to take away private insurance, which, let's face it, wouldn't be a bad thing. There's many bad agents out there. It's all about the commission. They really don't care once they land it. They certainly do not follow up, and it's hard to get a hold of them afterwards to get anything done. However, I do believe very much in I've seen socialism fail, communism fail off the coast of Vladivostok, Russia, when the Soviet Union collapsed. I certainly saw how China deals with democracy in Tiananmen Square in '89. And if you ever got to listen to the people in the fear in their voices, in their eyes in Hong Kong during that time, everybody was looking to get out of there. It's not a very innovative society. They copy us all the time. I mean, how many countries have done that? Our country is built off of innovation, entrepreneurial spirit, and hard work ethic, and having access to that funding to design and advance these technologies to that next level. It's been our success model for the 220 or 2019, anyway, 220 something plus years of success. And yes, we've gone through our challenges, and no, we are not a perfect society, but I am getting sick and tired of lazy individuals that just drink these individuals' Kool-Aid and expect that socialism is the answer when it's not. Listen, you don't take a good program and then nationalize it, and that is socialism. That's communism. That's the collective. That's the big government model. Venezuela is failing right now. And again, Americans are sending down the humanitarian effort. We're trying to get food to the suffering down there, and they're actually going through a transition process away from socialism. It collapsed. That country was one of the most wealthiest in South America. Didn't take very long for the communist doctrine, the dictatorship, to completely destroy that country. And, they're not helping the people down there. So, I don't know. I don't know how many times you've got to witness this stuff. And yet, you still have individuals that are jumping just because they're decent public speakers, and they're pushing these socialist programs on the scale of the United States that would collapse. I mean the $32.6 trillion medical for all plan. A system that works. They want to nationalize it. It's going to completely implode and collapse. And good old Bernie Sanders or Kamala Harris, who wants to get rid of the private insurance industry. The private sector is where the innovation has always been done. I have never seen, rarely have I ever seen anything, especially from the state of Vermont, or on any government model that has been produced, productive, efficient. And when it comes to the government, it usually ends up in a taxpayer bailout Ponzi scheme. I mean, let's face it, between Leahy, Sanders, and Welch, they definitely know how to create a Ponzi scheme. Granted, maybe they didn't investigate the two real estate speculators enough. I mean, Stinger definitely put a good sting on Vermont taxpayers, and Ariel Quiros was part of the whole package. And I don't know. I know I'm sick and tired of Leahy. I'm definitely tired of Sanders. I mean, he's America's version of Leon Trotsky. And listen, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, she's a lot prettier than Bernie Sanders. Kamala Harris is a lot prettier than Bernie Sanders. But these socialist collective nationalized programs is, I don't care how you try to rebundle it or rebrand it, it fails. Cory Booker, he's another one. I mean, he is definitely not any guy that can sit in that kind of Senate. And I realize he probably doesn't have the courage. His so-called Spartacus moment. And I don't know, this H-57 and S-25 is Vermont's 21st century Spartacus moment, where if you don't like your baby, you can just toss it. I mean, come on. This is the 21st century. We are an innovative country. We have one of the best medical communities on the planet, and we can't take the time to write decent legislation to make sure that a medical procedure is in the high 90-plus success rate, that our young daughters and our beautiful women in our lives don't necessarily have to risk their life if there is a pregnancy that they don't want, with all the innovations that we've had. All of the day after pill, you name it, the contraception, to just then put the pressure on a doctor if that child is born, a private little discussion, and then the pressure of the doctor, whether they'll pass it on to someone else in order to end that young child's life. Cowardly, barbaric, and it's especially in the 21st century, after all of the money, the millions of dollars that have gone into research of the human genome, the millions of dollars that are going into the research, the study of the human brain, and the long-term effects of pot, any of the DEA-restricted, seriously addictive drugs, alcoholism. The evidence is there. You can continue to ignore it if you want, but I just feel that, man, take the time to put in the safeties, the securities, and the protocols that if it's a medical community, it should go by the same medical standards that any other doctor does. It's just, I think it's a lazy, cowardly out. And Vermont wanted the attention. They love getting it. They want to be the first. They want to lead, but yet it just depends on certain categories. They want to, I don't know, they have a very lopsided, one-sided supermajority right now, and it's not too hard to figure out. There's a lot of haters in that group, and it just seems to be a new way of disguising some of the old hatreds that should have been left in the past, but now are being brought forward in the 21st century. And I don't know. Anyways, I'm looking forward to dissecting, seeing how we got on that subject. But Bernie Sanders, the man without the plan. He just announced his 2020 presidential run. He is not much of a innovative individual, period. And as far as I'm concerned, if you want to drink that Kool-Aid, you want to be a Bernie Sanders supporter, well, that's your fine. That's your prerogative. It's your, your choice. But I know there's a lot of really intelligent Americans out there that can, one, think for themselves, and two, if you just look into Leahyism, Sanderism, and Welchism up in here in Vermont, you will realize just about anything that they've touched, they've destroyed, or they've left in despair, pain, and poverty. So they probably should stay in their respective fields, and maybe that's about as far as they should go. There definitely should be term limits as far as I'm concerned, and I really hope that the 2016 experience with Bernie Sanders, yeah, you may feel sorry what the DNC, Hillary Clinton, and all the DNC chairs did to Bernie Sanders. But if you really listen to Bernie Sanders' message, I mean, he's got some internal hatred issues himself. I mean, he's definitely bigoted in certain areas. And as much as he claims he's working for the poor and the middle class, boy, does he really know how to put the old weight on the poor and the middle class. Meanwhile, he's a multimillionaire now. He's jet-setting across the country, and I would not give him $1, let alone any kind of donation, period, to spread around a failed ideology that should stay back in the 20th century as far as I'm concerned. It collapsed. It fails. It leaves nothing but despair, pain, and poverty. Anyway, be innovative. We need funding. We've got some outstanding technologies that we could advance. We need access to funding, and the DNA ID smart card is one of them. And I really hope that I can land the funding in order to get the prototype up to prove the concept. But let's face it, there's not a lot of private investors out there these days, especially in Vermont after being burned the way they were by Leahy, Sanders, and Welch, and the two failed real estate speculators that turned into a huge negative $375 million result, promising 10,000 jobs, a biotech company that was never a biotech company to be put up in the Northeast Kingdom, and good old Jane Sanders with the Burlington College debacle. I mean, listen, stay out of real estate speculation. Anything that is being pushed by Leahy, Sanders, or Welch on that matter, just avoid them. Anything they touch, despair, pain, poverty. Anyway, have a great day. Get out there and vote. Local Berry Town, Berry City folks.